Okay, welcome to this webinar, and the topic for the webinar today is maximising fertility in beef herds, the vet's role. And what we're going to share in the content of the webinar is summarised below. So we're going to start off talking about beef herd fertility targets and basic benchmarking. Then we're going to talk about the critical management areas that are essential to achieve these targets, and I'm calling that the 5-point plan. And during the talk, I'm going to focus on the key areas of where vets can get involved in these different management areas. Before I go on, I just wanted to share a little bit about myself for those that haven't met me. I'm Colin Penny. I graduated in Edinburgh Vet School a long time ago in 1985. I then spent 5 years in mixed practice in Lockerbie. After that, I went to work at the Edinburgh Vet School as a young vet, thinking I might stay there for 2 or 3 years, and ended up staying there for 20 years. And during that time, I worked and ran the farm animal teaching practice. And after that, I decided I needed a slight change in direction, so I went and got a job with Pfizer Animal Health as a technical vet. And now I've been working for 10 years with Pfizer, and that has now become Zoetis. That's just a bit about me. So we'll just move straight into the content now. I wanted just to start off by defining what I would describe as fertility efficiency in a beef suckler herd. And I think this is the best definition that I would use, and you can see in writing there that in basic terms, that it can be defined as achieving the maximum output in kilos of beef per breeding cow per year. And obviously that's all got to be done at least cost. So what are the key factors that affect the output or kilos of beef produced by a beef suckler herd? And the two key benchmark factors that affect this that I'm going to focus on in this first part of the talk are this here, which is the weaned calf crop percentage. And the second one is the percentage of cows calving in the first 3 weeks of the calving period, or another way of looking at that is the compact calving. And you can see weaned calf crop is a good benchmark because it includes all areas of production loss. So from getting the cows pregnant, keeping them pregnant, and then also includes obviously mortality between birth and weaning. Obviously there's other factors that affect kilos of beef produced, which is going to be genetics, growth rates, carcass grading, etc. These are the two main benchmarks that we're going to focus on. So what are the industry targets that our beef farmers are set? And if you look on HDB, QMS, depending on the part of the country you're in, SEC, these are the targets that are pretty well agreed for beef suckler herds. And the two again that we're going to focus on is percentage of cows calving in the first 3 weeks, which you can see the industry target is supposedly 65% or more, and calves reared as a percentage of cows or heifers put to the bull, target 94%. And we're just going to explore whether you think these targets are actually realistic or achievable. So the weaned calf crop, as I've mentioned, is a really good benchmark figure to assess the efficiency of a beef herd. And what it is number of calves weaned divided by number of cows or heifers mated as a percentage. And as I mentioned earlier, really good benchmark figure as it includes all areas of production loss right through getting cows pregnant, any losses from abortion, losses at the time of calving, neonatal losses, and losses right up, say, to the point of weaning. It's not good enough just to try and assess a beef herd's fertility performance based on pregnancy diagnosis, because as you can imagine, there are lots of herds where you might turn up, do PDs and get quite a good result, maybe 95% cows pregnant, but that herd doesn't necessarily have good fertility efficiency. It may have taken 6 months to get these cows pregnant with an extended mating period, and then you could have subsequent losses between the time that they've been PD positive and the time the calves are actually born and weaned. As far as benchmark figures, I'll show you some real figures in a minute, but I think any farm that's got a weaned calf crop of less than 90% there is scope for you to be investigating that and working out where those losses have occurred. You know, is it barren cows? Is it calf mortality? And that gives you an area to then focus on to try and make improvements in the herd. So is that 94% target calf crop achievable? If we look at an imaginary average herd, I'm going to call this, with 100 cows mated, and let's say you achieve a 95% pregnancy rate at PD. So now you've got 95 pregnant cows, and let's say 1 to 2% is normal abortion rate. So 2% abortion, you've now got 93 cows calving. You get a couple of sets of twins. The result of that would be 95 calves born, but let's say 5% mortality between birth and the first month of life, which again wouldn't be a disaster of many units, I don't think. And now you've got 90 calves alive at a month of age, but let's say again up to 2% mortality would be, you know, acceptable. There's going to be the odd calf die from, you know, maybe tetanus, black leg, pneumonia, something like that. And you've now got 88 calves weaned. So we've started 100 cows put to the bulls and heifers, and we've ended up with an 88% weaned calf crop with no significant disastrous losses at any stage in this production cycle. So you can see why a figure of 94% is going to be very challenging to achieve. And if any of you have done benchmarking on your clients' farms, then I imagine that these are the kind of figures that you're going to be finding. You know, I would say 85% weaned calf crop would be probably good or better than a lot of farmers are achieving. So these figures are taken from benchmark data from QMS, Quality Meat Scotland, and I think this is a biased population of farmers, or to better farmers anyway. But you can see the hill suckler herds were achieving 89% weaned calf crop on average, whereas the lower ground, maybe more intensive, maybe using more continental type bulls, 86%. But reasonably big range, but I think there actually will be a bigger range in this if you did it with amongst your own clients. And this is a really nice bit of data that was generated in the last few years by a project sponsored by Livestock Health Scotland and run by Tim Geraghty of SRUC up in Aberdeen. And again, this was volunteer farmers who took part, and they basically kept very good records right through to scanning pregnancy diagnosis, and then followed these pregnancies right through to the point of weaning. And you can see that in this survey, it's a bit depressing, you might say. You know, cows to the bull in total 1,800, only 1,500 calves were weaned, so it's only an 82% weaned calf crop. And you can see the challenges that they were coming across. One of the biggest ones appears to just be reasonably high barren rates. You know, if you've got a barren rate of over 10%, then there's no way, obviously, you're going to get close to a 94% weaned calf crop. So I think a more realistic figure when you're looking at these kind of figures with your farmers would be 90%. You know, if you can get a 90% weaned calf crop, you're probably well above average. If you can get 94%, fantastic, but you can see why that would be a challenging figure to hit. That's the first key benchmark, and then the second one is the percentage of cows calved in the first 3 weeks of calving. And the target for that the industry talks about is 65%. But as you can imagine, that is a really difficult target to achieve again. And if you look at it with your own farmers, I'd be very surprised if you find that many that are achieving that. You have to calculate it correctly to benchmark between farms, and I'll describe that in the next slide. But the reason that this figure, as you can imagine, is quite difficult to achieve is to achieve 65% of your cows calving in the first 3 weeks. That means that the subsequent breeding period, all the cows would have to be cycling on day one when the bulls go in. Every cow would then have to have at least one service opportunity during the first 3 weeks, and they would have to be served by bulls that are achieving conception rates of at least 65%. So you can see why, unless you've got your cow fertility spot on and your bull fertility spot on, it's going to be difficult to achieve. So how do you calculate this figure? If you're going to use it as a benchmark figure, this is the way to do it. What you do is you don't just count 3 weeks or 21 days forward from when the first cow calves, because this is a typical calving pattern. This is real data from one of my old farms. This is just a histogram, how many cows have calved in each day of the calving period. But what you have to do is calculate the theoretical start date of calving, which will be the date the bulls went in plus an average gestation length for that breed. So let's say 285 days for most kind of beef breed bulls. So what you do is you calculate what we call day zero, the theoretical start of calving, count forward 3 weeks from that, mark that on the calendar and include all the cows that have calved prior to that date there. And that is the repeatable way to benchmark it. If you count 3 weeks forward, if you just say to your farmer, oh, give me a list of how many cows calved in your first 3 weeks, the tendency is that they just go from when the first cow calves here, count forward 20 days, and it takes them to about here. So they massively underestimate the true figure. So if everybody benchmarks that the same way, it's a really good figure to use. And the reason that benchmarking this is important is it really has an impact on output. So by changing a calving pattern from this dark green, what we would call an extended sort of average calving pattern, into a more compact calving pattern, which is the one in yellow, you can imagine it really does change the value of the wean calf crop. And that's down to, the difference between a calf born in this first 3-week block compared to a calf born 15 weeks out. If you're weaning and say selling on a fixed date, there's going to be big differences in age of and weights at weaning. Okay. Sorry for that slight delay in the change of slides there. Okay, so if we now look at what the effect that has, or you can have by changing what we're calling an average calving spread period into a compact calving, it's quite interesting to kind of model that out. So this example takes a herd with a reared calf crop of 87%. If you improve that from 87% wean calf crop to 94%, the target, in this model you could increase the output per 100 cow herd by 4,400, and that's just based on 7 extra calves available to sell at weaning. But what's more interesting is if you take exactly the same number of calves weaned, but convert what we're calling an average calving pattern, which is the one on the slide back here. So that if we convert the calving pattern in green to the one in yellow with exactly the same number of calves, that generates an extra 5,000 or just over 5,000 pounds output, purely based on extra weaning weight of calves, because you're pushing calves back into earlier blocks of the calving period. So really, compact calving has got loads of advantages, but for farmers, certainly for farmers who are weaning and selling at a fixed date, makes a big difference to their output. To get started with benchmarking, you don't need a lot of information. We've produced these simple farmer data collection sheets, which have all the information that you would need to do a benchmarking analysis on a beef unit. And it's been a good way of getting this going, is to just maybe get half a dozen or 10 interested beef farmers, persuade them to do this benchmarking accurately, and then you can meet together 3 or 4 times a year with the benchmark group, go over the figures, talk about who's had success, who's maybe had not such good success, and share learnings from that. So management to maximise fertility, we're now just going to have a look at where the vet has a role in each of these areas. And this 5-point plan has been around for a while, and there's a really good booklet on it for farmers. It's been written by QMS. But these are the 5 areas that, if I was doing a farmers meeting, I would be saying that you have to basically pay attention to each of these 5 management areas, or you're not going to achieve the fertility targets we've talked about. So I'm going to come at this more from the area of, where's the vet's role in each of these management areas. So number 1 is managing cow body condition and nutrition. And the key reason that this is an important area to focus on is that it really controls what we call the post-calving anestrus period. And any factor that extends anestrus in beef cows is going to reduce the chance of them conceiving in a restricted mating. And the cows that tend to be at risk of that are obviously younger cows, so first calvers, calving down in poor body condition, and they suffer from extended anestrus. For an average beef cow calving in reasonable body condition, this is what will be happening after calving. Very quickly after calving, you'll get first waves of follicles developing on the ovaries, but they won't ovulate those first dominant follicles that develop. They will tend to turn over 2 or 3 at least waves, follicular waves, where the dominant follicle is selected, fails to ovulate because of insufficient LH plus frequency, so it regresses, another wave comes up, and then eventually when the LH plus frequency increases with time post-calving, they will ovulate. That will be a silent ovulation. First corpus luteum is formed, usually a short cycle, and then the cow might show its first standing estrus 40, 50 days or so after calving. So that would be a pretty standard post-calving anestrus situation in a well-fed, good body condition cow. But unfortunately, a lot of cows have extended post-calving anestrus because of challenges that they're up against. And the main things that actually influence the anestrus period in beef cows, the main one is calf suckling and presence of a calf, and the second one is really body condition scoring. So this first one, even though it's one of the major determinants in the anestrus, and it's an evolutionary mechanism, if you think about it, that when a calf is very young, suckling multiple times a day, it wouldn't be in the interests of the cow to ovulate and come in season, say, very quickly and getting calf within, say, 30, 40 days after calving, in the evolutionary point of view, because they would then end up calving at less than 365 days the following year and end up calving maybe earlier in the grazing season, in the pasture season. So they're kind of almost designed cows to calve at roughly a 365 day interval. So they calve at the same season each year. So calf suckling and presence inhibits cyclicity until the calf starts to get a bit older, suckles less frequently. So you can manipulate this by things like temporary weaning or restricted suckling, but it's not a management practice that's done in the UK or Europe. It's more a thing that's used a bit more in the US, South America. So really we just need to focus on this one, which is pre-calving nutrition and body condition score at calving. And the vet's role in this really is just ensuring that your farmers are thinking about the condition score that cows are at as they come up to the point of calving. When you're doing pregnancy diagnosis, it's an ideal opportunity at weaning, if you're doing it around about that time of year in spring calvers, for example, to persuade them to split the cows into different feeding groups so that they're going to manage nutrition to hit target calving body condition. Because, you know, calving cows very lean like this, it might be helpful when it comes to, or the farmers think it's helpful to reduce calving problems maybe, but it's going to, you know, end up with poor quality colostrum, cows that have got extended anestrus, and it's just not going to do fertility any good at all. If you get this right, then you can see how the theoretical model for beef cow reproduction can work. And we should be trying to persuade farmers to have 9 to 10 week mating periods. And is that sustainable? Yep, it is if you get cows calving. So say you have 60% or more of your cows calved in the first 3 weeks. Let's say a normal post-calving anestrus is up to 50 days, so roughly 7 weeks or so. What you can see there is any cow that calves in the first 3 week block, even with a postpartum anestrus at 50 days, no problem. They're all going to be cycling before the bulls go in. Second block, the same, and even cows that calve in this third block, anestrus for 50 days. Okay, they may not get 3 service opportunities, but most of them will have at least 2 service opportunities to be mated, and they should be mostly in calf. So in really well managed beef units, you'll find there's farmers that are just putting bulls out for 9 weeks and consistently getting 90 to 95% of the cows pregnant in that, and they can do it consistently. Where it goes wrong is if if you either have a infertile bull put out 1 year, or the cow's nutrition is very badly managed, so you have more cows with extended anestrus, and then it limits their opportunities for mating. I put in one slide about trace element deficiency because it always comes up in a discussion with farmers. It's sometimes an easy thing to blame for subfertility in beef herds, but in most cases it's down to energy deficiency, cow body condition score management. But there's no doubt about it, some of you will know of farms that have severe copper, maybe selenium deficiency issues, and we know that they can definitely cause problems in individual farms. So especially copper, I think it can depress the expression of estrus and heats. But in most cases, I think if you're dealing with these kind of trace element deficiencies, it's more likely to manifest as calving problems, stillborn calves, dopey calves, things like that. And then don't forget, you get the odd unusual trace element related diseases like CGLD. Many of you may have seen this condition, congenital joint laxity and dwarfism, and we tend to see this in spring calving suckler herds where cows have been fed a silage-based diet alone over the critical development stage of pregnancy. And if that appears to, in some types of silage, induce a kind of relative manganese deficiency, which seems to lead to these bone deformities. So that's a condition that we see every year in some herds. Usually you can get rid of it quite easily just by changing from a silage-only diet to a mixed concentrate and different type of roughage diet, and just a standard trace element supplement. So that's point number one. So second point where vets can get involved, and this is quite an easy area I think to get more involved, is replacement heifer management. And you can see that the reason that farmers need maybe some input into this is as more and more of them have tried to breed their own heifers to calve at 2-year-old, some of them are struggling to make a success of that. And in the days where they were buying in maybe dairy cross heifers that were slightly older and calving them at maybe 2.5-year-old, wasn't a problem. But I think if you're breeding your own homebred replacement heifers, you really need to think about the management of the ones you're going to keep as replacements at this critical time, between birth and puberty. So in the first 12 to 13 months of age, they need to be achieving average daily live weight gains of around about 0.9 kilos a day to hit the kind of growth targets that you want to get them at to be ready to be mated at around about 14, 15 months of age. So for percentage mature weight, if we say our cows are roughly 650 kilos, say an Angus type Limousin cross cow, then you can see the target mating weights, 65% at mating, 85% at first calving. You've got to have them at least 400 kilos body weight at the time of first mating. And I think sometimes we've got beef farmers putting this kind of age group of heifers forward into mating groups, and a lot of them haven't actually reached sexual maturity. They might think they look big enough, but for some reason some of them don't actually reach puberty till later than they think. So lots of opportunities for us as vets to get involved in managing health plans to ensure heifers reach these targets. And the kind of things that some of you may already be involved in is, if you're looking at these pre-breeding examination of heifers, then you can be maybe persuading your farmers to let you examine the pool of breeding heifers that they've got to choose from, and you would be palpating them. Some people are doing pelvimetry, looking at pelvic scores, what we call RTS, reprotract scoring, and that involves just basically palpating the tract and the ovaries and attributing a simple scoring system to it. And what you're trying to do is really identify heifers that have this infantile or pre-pubertal state, where they would have very poor tone in the uterine horns, really small kind of pea-sized ovaries, and these ones really just need to be taken out of the system. Okay, the other area that you can definitely consider getting involved with when you're talking about mating management for heifers is maybe trying to persuade some of your farmers to use AI. A lot of them are keeping a bull that is maybe the only easy calving bull they have just to mate a small number of heifers. And I think if you look at the cost effectiveness of that, it's very unlikely that it pays to keep a stock bull just to breed heifers alone. It's a very expensive investment to have hanging around to produce very few calves. So for a lot of cases, it's an ideal opportunity to maybe persuade them to use some synchronization in AI, and especially for those farmers who are trying to breed heifers as replacements, then really you could be using even sex semen in beef cows or heifers to produce the next generation of heifer replacements. And the vet, definitely, yep, you're the best person to be advising and planning synchronization programs. We're actually going to run another webinar on this topic, so if you are interested in synchronization in AI, then look out for another webinar focusing more detail on that. So that's cow body condition management, replacement heifer management. The third area that we can, I think, put some input into is number 3, which is avoiding difficult calvings or avoiding dystocia. And does it affect fertility in beef cows? Yep, absolutely. And those of you that have got experience of farmers who've gone away from, using this type big Charlie continental sires to something like stabilizer breed sires or easy calving bulls, you will pick up a general improvement in herd fertility. And that, I think, is one of the reasons why, for example, stabilizer herds are so fertile, is that the cows seem to calve easily. The calves are up on their feet. They don't get assisted calvings, problems after calving. For every cow that you have to calve out, or even assist a calving, there's an increased risk of things like, obviously, prolapse would be a worst case scenario, but just retained placenta, metritis, endometritis, all these things exist in beef cows. It's just that they're not identified the way we do in dairy cows, where we're doing routine fertility examinations all the time. There is data to back this up. I mean, you've probably got personal experience of it from farmers commenting that once they have less calving problems, you'll usually find the year after they have better fertility in the herd. This is some nice data from University of Missouri's beef unit, and you can see there they do AI for the first round of breeding in all their beef cows, and they followed through looking at the calving difficulty data on cows to see how it affected fertility the subsequent year, and you can see, yep, reduced submission rate, which would be manifesting basically extended anestrus in these cows that had bad calvings. First service conception rate lower, pregnancy rate after 70 days lower, and obviously pregnancy rate after C-section lower. So it's, you can just assume that any herd where you can improve or reduce the levels of dystocia and assisted calvings, you're going to generally improve herd fertility. So I think the areas to focus on is trying to get more involved in giving farmers advice when they go out to buy a new bull, get them to look at the EBVs or ask for the EBV data, looking at gestation length EBVs, calving difficulty scores, and even maybe educating them on how to interpret EBVs when they go to bull sales. That's point 3, and then the fourth point, controlling infectious diseases, and in a way this is the easiest one. So I think any beef farm where you're trying to maximize fertility performance, you need to consider and control the infectious diseases that could have an impact on fertility. So for most beef herds, that's going to be BVD, leptospirosis, IBR, campylofetus, and some of these diseases luckily are quite rare. Excuse me. So Campylobacter fetus, it definitely is out there, but hopefully you're not going to come across too many herds with that. But for most of you, you will know hopefully what your herd status is for things like BVD, lepto, and IBR. And if the herds have got risk factors, or they're already endemically infected, then my usual approach to that is it's just a simple cost-benefit decision. So if a farmer has evidence of lepto in the herd, for example, on serology, and he's trying to decide whether to vaccinate, to me it's just an obvious decision that if it saves one pregnancy loss, or helps one cow conceive, stops one cow abort, that will have paid for the vaccination for the year. So I just think herds that have risk factors for these diseases, you control them with vaccination, or obviously with things like BVD, you can go for eradication as well. So probably one of the easier management points to control in beef herd fertility management. And the last point is bull fertility, and again we're just going to touch on this in this webinar, but again we're planning to do another webinar just on that topic in the future. So if you have an interest in learning more about breeding soundness evaluation, then look out for that webinar. But the reason that I think it's critical to consider bulls, as well as the other 4 points before, is that we know that infertility or sterility in bulls is relatively rare, but the first time you look at a bull stud on any beef farm, you tend to find about 1 in 5 bulls that are what I would describe as subfertile. And for years, farmers have basically got away or been using subfertile bulls without really knowing about it, but they have been responsible, I think, for a lot of the gradual extension of calving periods that we see in beef herds. So this slide just shows, and again, I've used this in a farmers meeting often just to make the point that how bulls can impact herd fertility levels. So if we have what we're going to call a normal bull, 60% conception rate, put them out for 9 weeks of mating with a healthy group of cows that are cycling, you would hope to generate 60% of them pregnant in the first few weeks, 60% of what's left. So you've now got 84% pregnant, another 10% here. So 94% pregnant in 9 weeks of mating, only 6% barren. If you drop your bull conception rate to 40%, you can see the impact that that has. So after 9 weeks, you could potentially still have over 20% barren. If you run these two conception rate bulls out up to 12 weeks, you can see the difference starts to disappear. And if you can imagine, if you just let your bulls run for 15 or 16 weeks, even if with a 40% conception rate, your barren rate would be under 10%. And that, I think, is what happens on a lot of farms. They have bulls running for at least 3 to 4 months. They don't really have any idea on what conception each bull is achieving, because we're rotating bulls around groups of cows. And you can see even, the effect. You could have almost a sterile bull, let's say a 10% conception rate bull, put out for the first 6 weeks of mating, swapped over them with a normal 60% conception rate bull, and you could generate a calving pattern like this. But at PD, you would pick up a barren rate of only, say, 13%, and you might think, well, that's not a disaster, it's not great. But it's only when the cows subsequently start calving that the farmer realizes that the bull that was out for the first 6 weeks has virtually done nothing. So by swapping bulls around, rotating bulls, yeah, it's very easy to mask the effects of subfertile bulls. So what this means is that, routine bull breeding soundness examination, it should be an easy sell to farmers. I know it's like everything, it's challenging sometimes getting them doing it to start with, but there really is a massive cost benefit in identifying and getting rid of a potentially subfertile or infertile bull before a breeding season. And annual, if you can get your farmers and we had a lot of farmers that once we got them into a habit of it, just becomes an annual routine, and there's lots of vet practice doing this now, especially in the Scottish borders, where the farmers will just routinely get the whole bull stud breeding soundness checked every year as part of the routine management. And there's three levels of doing this, and again, I'll go into this in detail in the webinar on this subject. But what you might call level 1 is just physical examination, level 2 physical and semen evaluation, and then level 3 is full physical semen and also watching the bull serving cows. And you can't really go back to the slide before, actually, the physical and semen evaluation, that is what most people are doing as part of a routine breeding soundness evaluation, and you can't do that without using electroejaculation, and really that is what's made it a routine procedure in the UK. A lot of vets have now got the kit and have been on the training and are allowing them to get breeding soundness done. So really the vet's role as far as bull pre-breeding exam goes is that, I think unless you're doing some level of annual bull check, then you're really not going to get the best out of fertility in your beef herds. So we covered quite a lot of ground, and this is really just a summary of the main points. To me, would be, how can you maximise in your beef suckler herds, and how can you get involved as vets? Well, as far as cow fertility goes, it's all about persuading your farmers to monitor a cow body condition score. It's sorting out dystocia levels if you have too many assisted calvings on a farm, putting some input into that, controlling key infectious diseases. We're used to doing that, but getting involved in heifer integration, planning the integration of heifers into the herd, which ones they're going to keep, and making sure that they've reached target body weights before you breed them. Definitely a role for us to get involved in breeding soundness evaluation. And then this is the day-to-day stuff that you're doing with lots of your other input, reducing mortality, maximising live weight gain. That's all going to be, calf health, scour control, pneumonia control, etc. So yeah, plenty of areas for vet input. So hopefully you found that webinar useful. Feel free to contact me at Zoetis if there's anything that hasn't been clear, or if you'd like to discuss any of the things that we've covered in the webinar. And yep, look out for future webinars in the subject of beef fertility. Thanks.